Sharon McFadden ending Katie Hunter's report. There's renewed controversy over the wording of any future referendum on Scottish independence. The Electoral Commission says it must be given enough time to rule on the question to be put to voters. But Scottish ministers say the question asked in 2014 was straightforward and understandable. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Brian Taylor. Brian, why does this matter?
Well, it matters for timing, first of all. The Electoral Commission, if they are to test a question in detail, that alone would take 3 months. It could build in further delay into a process which already is contentious over timing. But it matters about the outcome. The outcome matters, therefore the question matters. You need to make sure the words are neutral. You need to make sure that they're fair and they produce a fair outcome. Now, remember this is the, take a glance back, it's the ballot paper from 2014. The question was, should Scotland be an independent country? The options there were yes or no. Though that question in itself, Sally, was pored over, was scrutinised in vast detail before that admittedly fairly simple outcome was produced. The Tories say they don't want to go through this process at all. They don't want a further referendum on independence, but if there has to be one, they say it should be, from their perspective, fair.
It matters because the general public want to know that if they're getting asked a question again, a question that they were asked only 5 years ago, that it is going to be a question that's not determined solely by the SNP government.
So that's the Tories. What's the Scottish Government standpoint? Well,
there's a bill before the Scottish Parliament at the moment that covers all referendums. It sets the rules generally for referendums, although of course ministers primarily got their idea on an independence one. They say that this question behind us here, should Scotland be an independent country, they say that sets the precedent, sets a clear precedent and, perhaps ought to be adopted for a further referendum, which Nicola Sturgeon wants to hold towards the end of next year. We spoke to Derek Mackay, the Finance Secretary. The bill is before the Finance Committee, and Mr Mackay told us his principal concern was that this should be determined in Scotland and by the Scottish Parliament.
We want to engage with the Parliament. We are having a national conversation, but we also believe in independence. That's a surprise to no one. But we've conducted a referenda in Scotland to the highest standards, and that's what we'll continue to do. In the face of adversity and economic calamity coming from the UK government.
Well, how do you see this being resolved?
I mean, right now, ministers are saying that's the precedent, that's the one to adopt. I wonder whether they might have to give some ground on this. First of all, because the Electoral Commission are insisting that they have a role and insisting that they require scrutiny to see whether things have changed since 2014. And also because, Scottish ministers are going to have bigger battles to fight. They have to get the power to hold this referendum in the first place, and then the small matter of trying to win it.
Brian, thank you very much.
A new row has broken out tonight over plans by the Scottish Government to hold a referendum on Scottish independence later this year. Scottish ministers asked the Electoral Commission to test the question to be used in such a referendum. But now UK Cabinet Minister Michael Gove has warned that this would be a waste of time and money, as the referendum definitely won't go ahead. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor Brian Taylor. Brian, what is Michael Gove's argument then?
Well, you'll recall here the Scottish ministers insist that they have a mandate from the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people to hold a further independence referendum later this year. Ironically, they hadn't particularly wanted to test the question. They were quite happy with the one from 2014, but under some pressure they agreed to write to the Electoral Commission saying that question, which was should Scotland be an independent country, should be tested again to see whether it's still relevant, still salient, still fair. Now, Michael Gove has stepped in to say, no, that's the wrong thing to do, a complete waste of time and money. There isn't going to be a referendum. It's in the hands of the UK government to determine, because such matters are reserved to Westminster. Isn't going to happen, and Michael Gove reckons that this is simply a gesture by the Scottish Government and the SNP to placate members of their own party and give the impression, he says, that a referendum is imminent, which, according to him, it isn't.
So what is the response then from the Scottish Government?
Well, they're not at all pleased. They describe it as blatant political interference. That's a comment from Mike Russell, who's the Constitution Secretary. Michael Gove is adamant that he is not seeking to veto this matter. It's entirely up to the Electoral Commission. They are an independent, autonomous body, but he says it is right to point out the view of the UK government that this isn't needed and would waste money. It'll now go to a meeting of the Electoral Commission's board next Wednesday to determine whether they respond positively to the Scottish Government or not. You know what, at that meeting they're going to have a government minister from two governments, one in each year.
OK, thank you, Brian.